Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. There are 5.4 million people of working age in Britain on benefits of one kind or another, 40% of them on sickness benefits. But the government say they're going to do something about it. They're going to put people back to work. But are they really going to do it? And we have a terror suspect on the loose. Yes, an old-fashioned, almost Colditz-style escape from a prison in London. We'll get the update on that. And a proposal's been put forward by a member of Parliament suggesting there should now be a ministry for men. Do we really want yet another subset of a government department? But before all of that, let's get the news from Aaron Armstrong.
Good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. A manhunt's underway after a former soldier charged with terror offences escaped from Wandsworth prison. 21-year-old Daniel Abed Khalif is accused of leaving fake bombs at a military base while serving with the army. It's understood he escaped from a prison kitchen and clung to the underside of a food delivery van. He was last seen wearing a chef's uniform. UK ports and airports are on high alert, with delays reported as a result of extra security checks. Commander Dominic Murphy, head of the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command, says the police are doing all they can.
We have officers and staff from across London and counter-terrorism policing, so across the country. As is normally the case in these matters, we have published the details of Daniel Khalif to officer colleagues around the country and borders colleagues as well. Our intention here is to try and find him as quick as possible. I believe very strongly that he presents a low risk to the public, but nonetheless, he's an individual who was on remand and should be in custody, and we're doing everything we can to try and find him as quick as possible.
Sir Keir Starmer has claimed cowboys are running the country as he criticised Rishi Sunak's handling of the school's concrete crisis. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, he visited one of the many schools which have been ordered to fully or partially close. The Labour leader says ministers have been cutting corners and carrying out botched jobs. But the Prime Minister responded by saying the government has acted decisively in the face of new information, calling Sir Keir Starmer Captain Hindsight. 17 people, including a child, have been killed and 32 injured by a Russian missile strike in the city of Kostyantynivka in the east of Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities have posted footage which shows a loud explosion ripping through a busy market. The attack came hours after the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken paid a surprise visit to Kyiv to reaffirm US support for Ukraine. The UK is set to rejoin the European Union's flagship Horizon Science research programme. The government negotiated membership of the £85 billion scheme in the Brexit withdrawal agreement, but it was never ratified because of disputes that emerged over the Northern Ireland Protocol. A report suggests Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will confirm a final deal this week after a 2-year absence. Well, today was the hottest day since 2016, with temperatures reaching 32 degrees at Kew Gardens in London. It could peak on Saturday, with 33 degrees forecast, which would be even warmer than Ibiza. If it does, it'll be the UK's hottest day of the year. An amber warning for heat has been issued until Sunday evening. Well, this is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker to just say play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Well, the Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride has said today we've got to do something about the number of people claiming out-of-work benefits. The figure has risen, and it rose very, very sharply during and after the pandemic to 5.4 million. Just think about that. 5.4 million people in this country of working age who are not working but are receiving benefits. And of that number, about 40% of them are on disability benefits of one kind or another. That's about 2.5 million people. Now, what the Minister is saying is, of course, for those who are severely disabled, for those who genuinely cannot work, we will, as a civilised country, give a safety net to those people. But what he's saying is there are plenty of those people who could, especially now with work from home and flexible working, get back into the workplace. And these comments are backed up by the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, making the point that actually for many people, going back to work is a good thing. You know, if you're told you're too unwell to work and you're signed off by the GP, well, in many cases, that leads to negative thoughts. It leads to you thinking, somehow, I'm a victim. And I know something about this, because after the aeroplane crash that I was involved in 2010, when the x-rays came back and I had major surgery, the neurosurgeon said, well, Nigel, with your condition, if you want, I can sign you off as partially disabled. And I told him politely where to go. You see, I think for many people, this is about a state of mind. And if government could provide a way to get 1 million people off disability benefits and back into work, that would be an enormous benefit to the country. You see, what we're actually doing is in the very same towns and cities where we've got large numbers of people on out-of-work benefits, we've also got huge job vacancies. And guess how we're filling those vacancies? Well, we're doing it by having immigration numbers of over 1 million people every single year coming in to do those jobs, which, of course, in turn, then puts more massive pressure on public services, housing, and pretty much everything else. But there is one disappointment in what Mel Stride has had to say. He doesn't intend for these changes to come in until 2025. They've been in office since 2010, but these reforms won't come in until 2025, which is after the next general election, which I think Labour will probably win. So I put it to you, will these important, vital reforms ever actually happen? Give me your thoughts, Farage at gbnews.com. Now, Fazileh Hadi is Head of Policy at Disability Rights UK and joins me down the line. Fazileh, I want to re-emphasise that for those that genuinely are disabled and have no means or way of working, we will be civilised, of course, as a society. But the point I want to make is this. If I go back to 1981, there were 790,000 people in the United Kingdom who had disability rights and benefits accordingly. That figure has rocketed to 2.5 million. And many of the new cases, and it's roughly 1,000 people a day, are being registered in this way. Much of this is to do with depression and anxiety. Surely, for many of these people, getting back to work might actually be a cure.
Well, while we're sort of sharing figures with your viewers, the figure I'd like to share is that there are 5 million disabled people working today in the labour market, contributing. And in fact, it was only last year that the government gave itself a pat on the back for getting 1.3 million more disabled people into work. So I think we need some perspective on this. Now, I'm really pleased that you and Mel Stride believe that there should be a safety net for disabled people who genuinely can't work, and we can agree on that.
Yeah.
But what I can't agree on is using measures like tinkering with the work capability assessment to support disabled people into work. Going back to your point about giving people hope and changing mindsets, there's lots of ways to do that. You can provide targeted employment support. You can make the access to work scheme work. At the moment, there's 14-week delay. You can implement the Equality Act so that employers have to make reasonable adjustments. The government has got an array of levers it could use, but why is it choosing to, if you like, put disabled people under the cosh and answer a load of questions, to be honest, which don't really tell anyone whether people can work or not? So I really challenge why they're doing it in this way. Disabled people who can work have always wanted to work, and they haven't been given the right support.
Are there really?
Do that now.
Are there really? Fascinating. I mean, do you really believe that there are 4 times the number of people who are disabled and can't work today as there were in 1981?
Well, I think, the demographics have changed. We're a much older population, and a lot of age is linked to disability. Age and disability are linked. So when we look at people over 60, the population of disabled people is more like 42%. We've increased the retirement age, so it's not till 67. We're a different society now, but the demographics, I'm sure, are playing their part.
Yeah, OK. No, I mean, they are all fair points of mitigation. I absolutely accept that. But the big picture is this. With 5.4 million people of working age not working, with a culture, it would seem, entrenched in some parts of our big cities that says there's no point going to work, you don't need to, actually, you're just as well off not working. Whether that's true or not, that culture, I'm afraid, has become embedded. We simply can't afford to go on with job vacancies and this number of people not working. That's really, I think, what the government's saying, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think, Nigel, if we really look at the root causes, who wouldn't want to work at the moment? I mean, benefit levels are shockingly low. Most people on benefits are going to food banks. They can't pay their energy bills. It is not like they're leading a good quality life. So I don't accept, if people are given the right support and the right tools, whether that's more digital training, whether that's targeted training. For example, I'm blind, but someone else might have a learning disability. Yeah. We need targeted help to get back into the workplace. The point I'm making is that why choose to make a test, a work capability assessment, harder and more onerous and more hostile, when actually so many things could be put in place to support us into work? And not only more money would we get if we were in work, we'd get social contact, we'd get a sense of purpose.
Yes.
Who wouldn't want to go into work?
Oh, no. I mean, that we all agree with. It's the culture that I was talking about. Fazley Fadi, thank you very much indeed for joining me in what is a very, very important debate for our future. Now, when it comes to this culture that I've talked about being embedded in certain communities and in some cases going on for generation after generation, if I look at the league table, the worst urban area in the entirety of the United Kingdom is Blackpool. Over a quarter of the working age population are on out-of-work benefits of one kind or another. And Scott Benton is the Member of Parliament for Blackpool South. Scott, what on earth is going on in Blackpool?
Good evening, Nigel. Well, funnily enough, I visited my local job centre several weeks ago, had a chat with a DWP staff there. They told me that over 40% of young people who are on unemployment benefits at the moment are frankly not playing ball with the system. They refuse to turn up to interviews, they don't answer the phone, and they will not engage at all. And the DWP staff there, who have been given millions of pounds by the government for work coaches, all the support, tailor-made support people need to get these young people into work, they are so frustrated, and they tell me they haven't got the tools to sanction people who can work but who clearly, for whatever reason, don't want to.
So Fazley made the point that actually, whilst benefits are there, if you look at the wages that are being offered, given the labour shortages, you know, in the Northwest, actually, people can go out and get really quite well-paid jobs. This 40% of youngsters would be better off in work, so why don't they want to?
They absolutely would be better off in work, Nigel, and I'm afraid we have a rotten culture at the heart of British society, and I suspect generation after generation this is getting worse. So over 2,000 job vacancies in Blackpool today, and yet for whatever reason some young people and people of all ages don't want to take those jobs. I've spoken to traders all summer in our tourism related economy. They tell me they've had job adverts out for month after month. Very few people apply, and ironically when people do apply for these jobs, some of whom go out of their way not to get them.
Now,
people have told me people turn up drunk at job interviews to avoid getting a job.
No, you know, to some extent, that category you're talking about are slightly different to those on disability benefits, but it's still part of this 5.4 million. So is what you're saying, Scott Benton, that you feel that the benefits offices need to have the ability to put tougher sanctions in place?
Absolutely. And by the way, Nigel, that's not me saying that. That's the DWP staff themselves who are so frustrated at the situation when they see clients day in, day out who can work but who choose not to. So clearly, the government has a job here to look at this 5 million people who are out of work at the moment. We keep talking about sluggish growth, low productivity. Well, for goodness sake, it starts here.
Yeah.
And if we can't solve this issue, guess what? We'll have to rely on the easy lever of cheap foreign labour.
Which is exactly what we're doing to the most extraordinary degree.
Absolutely.
On disability, I mean, what Mel Stride says is right, actually, that we will provide help for people, training for people, encourage the use of work at home and flexible working to get people off disability and back into work, and I do believe myself, to get people away from feeling like they're victims. I think it must be a very negative and very, very bad place to be. When it was offered to me, it was the last thing I wanted after an aeroplane crash. I wanted to get well and get back to work, you know. But not everybody does feel like that. And, you know, perhaps seeing the GP and being signed off is in itself part of a downward spiral. So I think much of what Mel Stride is saying, backed up by the Prime Minister, is right. And yet, we've got to wait till 2025 when we may well have a Labour government.
This is a problem. I'm afraid what the Secretary of State announced yesterday is a step forward. I personally don't think it goes far enough to deal with this systemic issue of sickness and indeed those who can work but who are on unemployed benefits and refuse to do so. It's a step forward. It's not far enough. And as you say, Nigel, what are the odds of this actually being implemented in 2025? Pretty unlikely, I would say.
I've been asking that question of you and of the audience and folks just to sort of conclude this piece, and I'll be very interested to get your comments in a moment. I don't think there's a cat's chance in hell of this happening. I think both Conservative and Labour governments, rather than grasp this nettle and face the abuse they're going to get from the BBC and The Guardian and everybody else, will just go on relying on cheap, imported foreign labour. That's my guess. Let's hope, for everyone's sake, that I'm wrong. In a moment, well, an old-fashioned prison breakout from HM Prison Wandsworth. We'll talk about that and why an Albanian gangster can't be extradited to the UK because apparently our prisons simply aren't good enough quality. Anne Widdecombe will join me on that in just a moment.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
So will it ever happen? Well, I'm sceptical. One viewer says to me, no chance. Just like everything else they say, it's all words and no action. Ian says to me on this topic, I doubt it. Even if Flip-Flop Rishi allows it, Starmer's lot will reverse it. Well, Ian, yeah, but I mean, you see, Flip-Flop Rishi's lot say they're not going to do it till 2025. And finally, Paul says, won't ever happen. Even if the Tories stay in power, because as soon as the left start saying it's cruel and nasty, the government will be too terrified to put it in place. Paul, I suspect you're right. It's a very, very different Conservative Party to the one of the 1980s who believed in what they were doing and took the criticism that came with it. So we learn of an extraordinary breakout from HM Prison Wandsworth that took place earlier on this morning. A man who was an army officer who was arrested, put in prison, awaiting trial for planting fake bombs around barracks. This happened in January of this year. It did not, of course, make the news at all. Well, I have to say, Daniel Khalifi is making the news now, and it really was a Colditz-style escape, dressed in a chef's uniform, strapped to the underneath of a delivery van. And I don't quite know where we are with this manhunt, whether anybody has a clue where he is. But, as you would expect, GB News' home and security editor, Mark White, is down opposite New Scotland Yard. Mark, please, bring us up to date with this manhunt. What on earth is going on?
Well, it is a nationwide manhunt at the moment. We are told that there is extra security at ports and airports right around the country, and very long queues at those ports and airports because, understandably, they're checking everyone that might fit the description of this young man to ensure that he doesn't leave the country. A lot of the search activity is being concentrated around London for the time being. He has connections to Kingston in southwest London, not that far really from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London, where he escaped from just before 8 this morning, and it was an audacious escape. There is no doubt about it, clinging to the underside of a food delivery van as it left that prison. I spoke a little earlier to Dominic Murphy, who is the commander in charge of counter-terrorism policing here at Scotland Yard, and he brought me up to speed with what happened.
So around 7:50 this morning, Daniel Khalif, who is a man who was on remand following a counter-terrorism investigation, escaped from Wandsworth prison and is currently at large somewhere in the UK.
And in terms of how he escaped, we're told that he was wearing chef's paraphernalia, chef's uniform, and that he may have clung to the underside of a food delivery truck. Do you know that to be the case?
Well, I can say that he was, yes, wearing checkered red and white trousers and a white T-shirt and brown boots when he escaped from prison. As to how he escaped, that's entirely a matter for the prison service. Clearly it will form part of our investigation. That's a matter for the prison service.
So confirmation there, of course, that he was wearing that chef's uniform. The police wouldn't go into whether he was clinging to the underside of the vehicle, but I have had that confirmed from other sources that that was indeed the case. And I can guarantee that from now on, throughout the prison estate, you will see, as a matter of course, checks involving these mirrors on long sticks, often used, of course, to detect explosive devices under vehicles, now being used to check whether there are any prisoners under these vehicles leaving prisons across the country.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed. What a really quite extraordinary story and pretty unusual to get a prison break like this. Well, joining me now down the line is Anne Widdecombe, former Minister of State for Prisons and, of course, a Brexit Party MEP, colleague of mine in more optimistic days just a few years ago. And prison breaks like this are relatively rare these days, aren't they?
Well, there's always a certain level of prison breakouts. But what's odd about this is, look, Wandsworth is a remand prison, but it's most certainly not an open prison. I mean, it's secure. And therefore, as a matter of routine, if vehicles are coming in and out, mirrors are held underneath the vehicles. I mean, both ways. Vehicles are normally searched on leaving. They're searched for things like drugs. And I do not understand. I mean, if this story is true, that he got out clinging to the underside of a car or vehicle, which is the standard escape method. You see it in every prisoner of war film that you ever see. Prisoners trying to do. It's so standard. It's so basic. It's so easy to counter. I don't understand it if it's true.
No, well, and we'll find out more, but it does sound as though it is true and a remarkable breach of security. Now, Anne, we have an Albanian criminal. He smuggled a stone of cocaine into the United Kingdom. He's laundered approximately £250,000, and he's currently being held in a prison in Germany, and the British government have gone for an extradition. But a German court, a big German court, using rules from our old friend, the European Convention on Human Rights, have said that he can't come to the UK because our prisons aren't up to standard. It sounds astonishing. Please, can you tell us what on earth is going on?
Well, I mean, they're talking through their hats, quite honestly. I mean, to say that our prisons aren't capable of housing serious criminals, of course they are. And of course, prisoners are fed, prisoners have access to medicine. But, I mean, it is perfectly true that with the overcrowding levels that there are at the moment, the regimes, which I can't believe this guy would be remotely interested in, the regimes of training and education and those sorts of things, they get squeezed. They get squeezed because the more prisoners you have, the more prison officers have to deal with security rather than dealing with those sorts of things. And very often the first casualty of overcrowding is actually the rehabilitation regimes. So that is poor, but I can't believe an Albanian drug smuggler, is absolutely dying to do his NVQ in something or other. It's most unlikely. So I think the German courts are making a rather pathetic and very silly point. Very silly point.
And yet, German judges, Anne, are using ECHR not to deport a foreign criminal in much the same way we could argue that British judges interpret ECHR so that we can't deport foreign criminals. Took us 10 years to get rid of Abu Qatada. Doesn't it illustrate, once again, just how ludicrous this well-intentioned convention that came into force 70 years ago last week is?
Yeah, I mean, it was never designed to cope with what we're coping with today any more than was the 1951 Convention on Refugees. It was designed to deal with the appalling circumstances that we had encountered after the Second World War, during the Second World War, before it and immediately after it. It was those appalling circumstances that they were trying to counter, not modern day circumstances. And so, frankly, ECHR isn't fit for purpose. It's why we can't send prisoners to Rwanda. I mean, Rwanda's asylum seekers to Rwanda. Rwanda is perfectly acceptable as an offshore processing centre. And it's why, as you rightly say, we're limited in what we can do with criminals. Now, the answer is to come out of ECHR. It's not to abandon all human rights, God forbid, but it's to have our own Bill of Rights, which is proportionate and sensible and limited, and ditch ECHR. Not so easy because of various treaty obligations, but could be done if only we had a government that was determined to do it.
Is this a bit like Brexit round two? This whole question of a court that has completely outlived the usefulness of its original intention, rather like the trade deal that we were sold back in the common market days had become a political union. Do you think the British public are ready for this?
I think they're ready for us to come out of ECHR. Because I think gradually, just through stories like this, it's gradually infiltrating the public consciousness that this institution isn't working the way that it was designed to work when it was very first set up. And things do become redundant over the years. Things that were desperately necessary when they were created do become redundant. And I'm afraid that that is what has happened with ECHR. Now, there is a choice. Either it itself reforms and looks to a different brief, or we come out and we institute our own brief.
Well, Anne Widdecombe, as ever, plenty of clarity there. Thank you for joining us again on the show. In a moment, we will talk about the proposed meeting that's going to take place between Little Rocket Man from North Korea and, of course, Mr. Putin. What does it all mean 4 months into the Ukrainian so-called spring offensive? Oh, I nearly forgot. NatWest have a new chairman. Is he going to be any better than Sir Howard Davis? All of that in just a moment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We need to refocus on what's going on in Ukraine. There is perhaps quite a big political development taking place, one that could boost Russia's military power. Also, something very big has happened in the last couple of days, as yet unconfirmed, but it looks like a Russian drone might have landed in Romania. That is NATO territory. So all the more reason for us once again to get Colonel Richard Kemp, former British Army commander, onto our programme. Now, Richard, welcome back. I've been watching your output and your writings on this over the course of the last 4 months as Ukraine launched their spring offensive, and we keep getting a few optimistic reports here and there. But in truth, 4 months into this, with vast casualties, it isn't going that well for Ukraine, is it?
Unfortunately, it's not, no. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians have not succeeded in really breaking through even the first line of the Russian defences. And once you get through that first line, there are then huge miles and miles and miles of further defences to fight through. It's not a very easy thing at all. And the reality is that the Ukrainians don't have the capabilities that we would hopefully have if we were fighting a similar war. And above all capabilities, I think they lack air power, and we've failed to provide air power to them. And it's very difficult to counter this kind of defence without any air power and without enough tanks, infantry soldiers, and I think above all without enough artillery. So it's a really tough task. That they are fighting hard, and they've made some advances, but very, very limited.
No. Well, many people, Richard, have drawn comparisons with the Great War. Trenches, barbed wire, artillery fire, infantry advances over open ground, huge casualties when anybody attacks. But you in the Telegraph today were suggesting that with Kim Jong-un meeting Putin and potentially giving him a huge supply of weapons, albeit somewhat out of date, but a huge supply of weapons, you were almost drawing a comparison with what happened in 1918 when the Germans launched this massive attack against the Allies and almost won the First World War.
Yeah, and the Germans basically bled the Allies dry on the front line for a long period of time. And while they were doing that, they were accumulating huge amounts of combat power so they could strike through the line and break through and defeat the Allies, which they succeeded to some extent. It was called the Kaiserschlacht in 1918. And it basically took more territory than had been taken by either side in the previous 4 years of the war. And I think that's what Russia has in mind. Russia is currently, I believe, is trying to get Ukraine to exhaust its Western-supplied, Western-equipped maneuver forces, tanks, artillery, infantry soldiers, everything they've got, to exhaust them on the what's called the Suvorkin line, which is the main defensive line in Ukraine. And once they've done that, I would imagine that Putin will wind up to launch an offensive back against Ukraine. But in order to do so, he needs a lot more artillery, tanks and other weapons than he's got now. And North Korea is an ideal place to find that, but beyond what he can manufacture himself.
Final thought, Richard, but potentially very important one. A drone that landed and exploded in Romania a couple of days ago. It has not yet been confirmed that it was a Russian drone, but the suspicions are building that it was. That would be a Russian missile onto NATO territory. History is littered with horrible outbreaks of war that happen through accidents. Could this possibly be one of those?
Yeah, of course, we've seen this before. Earlier in the war, we saw a Russian, well, in fact, it turned out to be a Ukrainian air defense missile that landed in Poland. It was originally thought to be a Russian missile. And there was a lot of panic then about this is going to lead to NATO coming in. I don't think it will. I think we'll probably find out if this is a Russian drone. We'll probably find out this was an accident. It wasn't an intentional attack on a NATO country. And it will be calmed down after that. Of course, it's very serious. And any kind of firing of munitions at a NATO country has to be taken seriously. But I suspect that calmer heads will prevail than those who might think, well, immediately we must unleash something against Russia.
Well, some reassurance there at least. Colonel Kemp, thank you once again for giving us that update. And I have to say, you read the British press and it's always wildly optimistic about Ukraine's military chances. Regular viewers to this programme will know I've been pretty sceptical about this spring offensive, which is now going into autumn many, many times. The What the Farage moment. Now, Chris Bryant, Sir Chris Bryant, the MP for Rhondda, the man who told the House of Commons under parliamentary privilege that I'd taken £500,000 from the Russians in 2018, all part of the Russia hoax. None of it was true, complete lie. And then went on Good Morning Britain, produced his book to show that he is absolutely now, as chairman of the Standards Committee, the man setting the standards for public life in British politics. Have a listen to this.
That you've normalised lying to Parliament. If you have a Prime Minister and ministers repeatedly misleading the House of Commons and refusing to correct the record, of course, you know, people... We've all done it. We've said million instead of billion, or we've managed to get a statistic wrong for whatever.
Or you've been
reason.
Advised wrongly.
It might be.
You know,
all
can
of that.
Be, yeah.
But then you correct the record. That's the rule. You correct the record.
That's the rule. You correct the record when you get things wrong. Well, Sir Chris Bryant, you haven't corrected the record with me one little bit. What you said led to a huge amount of abuse. Abuse being poured on me led to me having to cancel an event because of threats of violence. And yet now the news, folks, is that Sir Keir Starmer has put Sir Chris in the shadow cabinet. So I better ask you, Sir Keir Starmer, are you happy to have someone who has lied outright to Parliament as one of your shadow cabinet ministers? This is not going to go away. Now, Sir Howard Davis, the dud that runs, or is the chair of the NatWest banking group, the man who's failed at virtually every major public appointment that he's had, the man who made the decision that Alison Rose must stay as the CEO, only to be forced to have another emergency board meeting a few hours later, and of course to get rid of her for breaching client confidentiality and for breaking absolutely every rule in the FCA's code and indeed the banking book. But Sir Howard's got away with it. Yes, he's going to be allowed to stay until the end of his term as chairman at the end of April next year. That means from the moment at which he should have been sacked for absolute negligence in every way, he will have earned another £500,000. Doesn't the establishment look after its own oh so beautifully? And Dame Alison is still on course to walk away in total with £11 million from NatWest. And given that 39% of that is owned by us, we in effect are paying these people huge sums of money for breaching confidentiality, for lying about it and breaking the rules. Doesn't make sense to me. There is a new boss going to take over as chair of the NatWest Group. His name is Rick Haythorne-Waite. He is a very distinguished businessman, had big jobs running MasterCard, many other major companies, many other boards, heavy involvement with South Bank, and a very distinguished man in many ways. All that worries me ever so slightly is that he said recently that military orders ought to be softened to help with diversity. Oh dear. Nothing's going to change, is it? Nothing's going to change. The woke culture will be there, and we still are the people that have bailed it out. And a final thought. The weather is beautiful. 6 weeks it rained for the kids whilst they were off school. Now every day seems to be amazing. 12 hours of sunshine, not much wind at all. And that, of course, means that it's very, very good for the criminal gangs that want to ship people across the English Channel. And these remarkable photographs were taken in the English Channel this morning. If you look at how calm the sea is, if you look at the clarity of the pictures, you can see the faces very, very clearly of these people on the boat. I can't see a single woman. I can't see a single child. I would estimate, don't know, on that boat, is it 70? Is it 80? Is it 85? It's difficult to say. But these are now gigantic boats, and many hundreds are coming every single day. And this will go on until at least next Tuesday or Wednesday, because that's what the weather forecast says. Now, a Conservative Member of Parliament is suggesting, Yorkshire MP Nick Fletcher is suggesting, it's time we had a Minister for Men. We've got ministers for women and for those that are disabled and for those of all sorts of genders and ethnicities. Is it time we had a Minister for Men, or would it be wholly unnecessary bureaucracy? We'll try and find out the answer in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
So Nick Fletcher, Tory MP for Yorkshire, says we need a men's minister. Well, he's right about one thing. There are certainly men's issues that perhaps have been neglected over the years. Things such as male cancer checks that have been really, really underplayed. He's also right in many ways to point to a problem that we're not quite sure what men ought to be anymore. We're worried about saying anything, about appearing to be overbearing, worried in an office whether we might be bullying. There are lots of men's issues, and in many ways, you know, it's been the rise of certain figures on social media, you know, who actually, some may say, represent extreme views. But Belinda Brown joins me, men's rights activist. Let's just start there. The Andrew Tate phenomenon. And I mean phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, you will not find a teenage boy that does not know of Andrew Tate, that hasn't looked at some of his online content. And actually, do you know what? Some of it's quite sensible. It says, look after yourself, be fit, be ambitious, try and get on in the world. But when it comes to how you interact with women, some of it, I think, is pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
When Nick Fletcher says there should be a minister for men, and you, Belinda, as an activist in this area, I think you believe this is the right thing to do as well. What kind of image, what kind of masculine male image are we looking to fight for?
I think that what Andrew Tate did, he's in a sense milked this area. You know, men have been really put down. There's been this awful phrase, toxic masculinity, and he's kind of ridden this wave, which is really unfortunate. And I think the thing is that he's touching on. Let me just talk about something. It's a tiny truth. I'm a researcher, and one of the things that my husband and I, we did a lot of research into men and employment and all the rest of it. And one of the things that we found was that when men were in a relationship, so firstly when men were in a relationship, then when men got married, then when they had children, with each step their income went up, their employment went up, particularly amongst the, let's say the less educated. It was really that a place in the family was a really important motivating factor for men, particularly if you don't have a really grand, interesting job. And this family role has been completely taken away from them. And I think that's left a big vacuum that we really need to look at. And the thing is, there's a real irony, because what you actually find, and there's so much research on this, so what you find is that in those areas, there was a massive study done by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, great place, massive study, and it showed that where male employment increases, rates of marriage increase, rates of single parenthood go down, and it's good for everybody. I want to be clear, I am absolutely in favour of women working. I don't think...
Yeah, what would, Belinda, what would feminist groups say about a minister for men? They'd say, oh, hang on, men have had it all their own way for 2 million years.
You know,
it's what they'd say.
Do you know, one of the things I was really pleased about when I was listening to the radio this morning was actually, I think people are starting to realise that there are real issues for men. Yes, you're always having people making those arguments, but we've got sons, lovers, husbands, fathers, and we know that there are issues. I don't think people realise the extent to which there are issues, but I think the vast majority of people appreciate. You know, we see our sons suffering at school. You know, the situation with boys in education from the age of 5 right through to the end of university.
They're being told they're bad people.
Absolutely, and they're doing much worse. So I don't think that there's going to be a big argument against this. I think that there's going to be support for it.
Do we think that establishing a minister for men, another subset of a huge Whitehall department, the bureaucracy that goes with it, do we think it'll really make any difference?
I think it will make a difference.
Your trust in government is charming in many ways.
I have no trust in government. I have no trust in government. What I trust in is people they're sort of a bit led by the nose. If they see the government as saying this is important, they'll start believing it. You know, when the government said, you know, women are important, they believe that. It will actually enable people to take this issue really seriously if there is a minister for men. I think it is an important thing, and I think it could really achieve massive things. And I just think it's so important that it isn't seen as a divisive issue, that we do work together. And you know,
Okay. Very interesting. I was in America 2 weeks ago for the first Republican debate. I know Trump wasn't there, but the other contenders were. And the new kid on the block, Vivek Ramaswamy, when they talked about social issues and difficulties in American cities, he said there's one big problem. It's fatherlessness.
Absolutely.
It's a lack of male role models. And what's been very interesting is that debate is now very live in America. But it's almost as if, Belinda, in this country, no one dares say that actually a kid's life chances are better off with two parents. We almost dare not say it anymore.
It's such a shame. There is so much data to back it up. And I'm talking as a single mother. You know, I am a single parent, but I still recognise the importance of having a father in the family. The father is like the linchpin to the survival of the family, and we need to get fathers back into families. And a key role in that is actually ensuring that boys are educated and men are employed. That is a really key issue, which, you know, of course I want that for women as well, but women have got that. I feel confident about women. That will bring fathers back into their families. It's a key, I think it's really important. And I think that's what underlies so many of the problems that boys are having in education, is fatherlessness. Actually, I don't know if there's time for me to talk about a little research.
You've got a max 30 seconds.
We did a little research project where we looked at boys who had a more traditional point of view about the role of men in the family, and we assessed that level, and what we found was that boys who understood that there was a place for men to support families, provide a role, that they were actually doing better at school because they had this vision of a role for themselves.
Interesting.
And I think that's really important.
Interesting. Belinda Brown, said with great passion, and thank you very much. Well, somebody who knows a lot about being a father, because he's got, I think, 6 kids at least. I'm sure he's got 6 kids. It seems a lot of these senior Tories have an awful lot of children. Joins me now, and it's Jake. Is it 6, Jacob?
It is 6.
Right, now, tell me, what is coming up on the Jacob Rees-Mogg State of the Nation show
Once again,
tonight?
we're talking about energy and this ridiculous windfall tax that is stopping us getting oil and gas out of the North Sea because the companies are losing money doing it. And this is really bad for consumers. It puts prices up. It increases our balance payments deficit. It's just generally bad economic policy that, as always, falls on the backs of consumers.
We need to get Chris Packham on the show at some point, because he did a little interview for us the other day, making all the opposite arguments, but we need to have these debates. Jacob, I'm astonished. So little coverage in today's press about some of the potentially draconian laws that were passed last night in Parliament, with only 9 MPs objecting.
I know. Look at Section 10 of the bill, which could potentially make it a criminal offence to sell your family home if it doesn't meet insulation criteria. And you could put in prison for up to 12 months.
And no one wants
outrageous
to talk about it. Liberty, it seems, is unfashionable. It will come back into fashion at some point in the future. Well, it jolly well had better do. Right, that is it from me. I'll be back with you tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock live here in London. But for now, let's have a look at the wonderful Indian summer weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A warm, sultry night to come for many of us. More hot sunshine into Thursday. A small chance of thunderstorms developing towards western and southwestern areas in particular, as low pressure sends heat and humidity northwards across the UK. Now, any thunderstorms that do develop will be very hit and miss, quite isolated, mostly towards western areas overnight. But there is the chance that these thunderstorms will contain frequent flashes of lightning, so they could be quite visible in the night sky where they do occur. Some low cloud creeping into the east. It's a warm night for many, mid to high teens, and in some places no colder than 20 or 21 Celsius. So some patchy fog about first thing Thursday, some of this misty low cloud in the east, but that will tend to retreat to North Sea coasts. And for many, it's a fine day, but we've still got that potential thundery activity moving north into Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland by the afternoon. It's a very warm or hot day in places, 29 to 32 Celsius in the south, 28 Celsius for northern Scotland. So the heat is extensive across the UK, and it's a warm start to Friday. Again, some of that misty low cloud in the east. Again, the threat of thundery showers towards the west and southwest, but otherwise it's just a case of sunny skies, and the temperatures continue to rise up to 33 Celsius in places by Saturday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. In a time when energy supply is short and costs are high, why is His Majesty's government making North Sea gas and oil exploration more difficult? While we're constantly reminded of energy companies' profits, some companies are now making losses because of the draconian windfall tax imposed by a supposedly Conservative government. It's time the Tories scrapped it. 156 schools have been confirmed to contain aerated concrete, and 19 of them have had to delay the start of term. But the Education Secretary has found herself embroiled in yet another imbroglio regarding her language. After her controversial hot mic moment, Gillian Keegan has told school leaders they need to get off their backsides, posteriors as some call it, and respond to the concrete crisis consultations. Is shoplifting no longer a crime in Britain? Has it been relegated to the pettiness and insignificance of cyclists ignoring road signs? Well, that is exactly what the chairman of Asda, Lord Rose, has suggested. Remember that supermarkets account for theft in their pricing. So, as ever, this means more costs for you paying for the thieves. Plus, the Department for Work and Pensions has revealed the extent of the UK's economically inactive population. Owing to the disruptive effects of the pandemic, 5.4 million people are now on out-of-work benefits, even though a labour shortage is the excuse for mass migration. Apparently, the department does have plans in place to get Britain back to work in 18 months' time. State of the Nation starts now.